Well, welcome all to our Jacobson Family Sustainable Impact Lecture Series. Tonight's topic is all on entrepreneurship, unlocking your company's social impact potential. I'm Jill Kickle. If you don't know me by now, I'm the acting director of the Brittingham Social Enterprise Lab. And as mentioned, as part of this Jacobson Family Lecture Impact Lecture Series, we explore multiple topics on entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, of course, tonight, social impact and social innovation at both the local and also global levels. In the past, our conversations and discussions have covered topics such as AI and climate change. We did that last semester, Hollywood and social change, and of course, our kickoff of this past year on affordable housing. Tonight, we'll be discussing all things entrepreneurship. This term was first coined by Gifford Pinchot back in his seminal book in the 1980s. And he was actually 20 years ago, believe it or not, a guest speaker in one of my entrepreneurship classes. So entrepreneurship is all about innovation that can be created and developed within organizations. And we have so many students in our Master's of Science of Social Entrepreneurship that are really interested at this intersection of how they can create change, impact within existing organizations. So right now, I will turn it over to our director of our MSSC program, JJ Lee, for introductions and to continue our lecture series. Thank you, JJ.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you everyone for attending and being here today. My name is JJ Lee. I'm the director of the Master of Science in Social Entrepreneurship. You'll hear MSSE. And this program is for students who are really passionate about social impact and gaining business skills to tackle those issues. We are a very flexible program, and a lot of our students are doing the program part-time while keeping their full-time jobs. And we are at the USC Marshall School of Business, and our applications are now open. So if you are interested, and or have someone you think might be a good fit for the program, please feel free to share our information and about the program. So we have here today with us, and I'm going to introduce our guests today. First, Tess Fenn. She is the head of community and impact at Beem. She has 15 years of diverse experience, initially in theater production and UN event coordination. She transitioned to leading product launches for global brands like Activision, Toyota, and Best Buy. She co-founded Global Gaming Initiative in 2013, and she later developed the B Corp ad tech platform JUCO. She earned an MA in social innovation and digital storytelling from NYU and has advised nonprofits on partnership building and fundraising. So welcome to Tess. Next, we have Allison. And Allison, I'm sorry if is it Gister? Just Gister. Okay, thank you. Allison Gister leads the grants management team. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. That's my dog barking. I don't know if you could hear that. Sorry. Allison Gister. She leads the grants management team at the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, ensuring effective and compliant grant making practices aligned with IRS regulations. She also collaborates with leadership to develop an innovative knowledge management strategy. And she previously worked at the Annenberg Foundation for over 8 years, serving as grants manager and providing programmatic support to the board of directors. And she is our own MSSC alum, and she holds a bachelor's degree in history from Washington University. Sally Chan. She is a highly experienced CSR executive with over 24 years of expertise. And she's currently serving as the executive advisor at Paramount Veterans Network, where she leads the annual Veterans in Entertainment Summit. She was previously at Warner Brothers Discovery, where she oversaw community outreach, workforce development, and transportation management. She has an MBA from USC and a BS from Business Administration, so she's a double Trojan. And we're really excited to have Sally, Tess, and Allison here for this event. Thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to Sally.
Thank you so much, JJ. If it makes you feel any better, my 6-year-old is like knocking down the door saying, Mom, I need my homework. Like that never happens, only when I'm on a panel. Anyway, thank you so much for just inviting me to be here. I'm so excited because I have the easy job of just being nurtured and enlightened by our two distinguished speakers. I feel like we have to start with a fun fact here that Tess and Allison both had Dr. Kickle as their academic advisor on separate coasts. So that's so cool that you have that in common. And I know, Tess, you have an adorable puppy whom I hope makes an appearance, maybe. We'll see.
Yes, he's napping for the first time ever.
With a new haircut, right? I know. Okay.
Yes.
So our agenda for today, I know we're going to spend the next like 30 minutes hearing from Allison and Tess, and then we want to leave enough space for folks to answer questions. We actually received quite a few questions through the Eventbrite, and if you have any, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll definitely try to get to as many as we can with today's session. As with any good lecture, our goals are really to make sure we're answering any practical and personal questions as you're navigating through your own journey. And we definitely want to chat openly and honestly about any challenges, opportunities, struggles, failures, real or perceived, that you might be dealing with and that we've all encountered. And so we want to make sure we create space for that. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're exploring some trends that Allison and Tess are seeing in their respective businesses. And I think that's probably an appropriate discussion as we're all sort of contending with such seismic shifts in how we look at business and do business. So that's a lot, but we'll get through it in this hour. So I'm going to start off by asking Tess and Allison if you could just share a bit about your current work and how you got into it.
Absolutely. So I'm actually just wrapping up my work at Beem. So it's a little tricky talking about it, but I'm happy to talk about it because I'm very proud of what we've done. So Beem is a platform designed to help connect creators and their fans in a way that is much more direct and leads to sustainable income models for a creator. That can be a filmmaker, a musician, an influencer or a speaker who wants to generate their own master classes and connect directly. So I've been working on that for 3 years. It brought me into the world of Web3, which I'm really energized by and excited to have learned a lot more about what blockchain and crypto and emerging technologies can do. So that's me. And I came on board as the head of communities, but I added in the impact to my title because it's something that I've always been passionate about, always done in other roles. So I wanted to make sure that we had a focus on that.
Awesome. Great. And I have spent basically my entire career, so the last 20 years or so, in philanthropy, and I'm currently, as we said, at the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, where it is a nonprofit, but as a private foundation, really ultimately our business is making social impact. And so I have typically been more on the operational side of that, ensuring that, sort of the how we get the money out is aligned as strategic as what we are trying to fund and the impact that we're trying to have in the world. So that has been a mix of technology projects, information projects. What do we know about the work that we're doing? What don't we know? How do we fill those gaps? And then just making sure that we do things efficiently and values aligned.
I love it. And as you can see, Tess and Allison bring such great perspective and experience from both, private and public sectors. So we'll definitely get into that. Tess, I wanted to pick up on something you had mentioned, that you added the word impact and really the scope of that responsibility to your title. What really prompted you? I remember during our initial meet and greet, you talked about instigating. So can you get into a little bit about what prompted that addition?
Yeah. Well, so it's always been at the forefront of what I've been working on. You know, I started my career in the nonprofit sector and then have played both in the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector ever since. But when I've worked in settings that aren't specifically designed for social impact, I know the statistics that'll get behind, you know, why it's actually proven to be such an effective part of business and such an important element. So I try to come to the table with that evidence and also ideas for why I think this institution can have a meaningful impact while, you know, having the growth objective. So when I joined Beem, it's a creator platform, a digital toolbox, as we called it. And there's a lot that can be, I'm trying to work on my ums. I just caught myself. So there's a lot with a technology company that can be implemented. And I felt like it was a big responsibility that needed to be addressed from the forefront of founding this company. So I just wanted to make sure it was part of our plan and ethos. By adding it to my title, it made a priority for myself, but also for the leaders of the company to take it seriously if they were choosing me for the role, which fortunately they did.
I love that. And I think it just shows such foresight. I'm often asked the question, like, how do we justify the addition of adding CSR and DEI? And I'm like, we're still asking that question. I mean, it's like, if you want to maintain relevancy, right, to your point, if that those have to go hand in hand. But then I have to remind myself, like, even just 10 years ago, I was debating with our Corp Comm team whether it made sense for our CEO to even have a blog, right? Because they're like, you know, an individual is not the entity. And so if I think in just 10 years, how we've been able to formalize this practice of social impact and CSR, it just doesn't seem like a long horizon, right? Even though I'm sure those challenges on those on a day-to-day were hard. So just really kudos to you for just having that vision. I wanted to ask you, Allison, I mean, you've worked at two of the, you know, biggest, most respected foundations, and I'm sure as you were navigating through so many challenges and the impacts of COVID, how were you able to sort of scale and figure out, like, how do you even prioritize and address all the needs coming at you at once?
Yeah, so COVID, or 2020, was an incredibly, I think, momentous year, obviously, for all of us, given with the pandemic and social unrest and everything. And it also coincided with the Hilton Foundation having a growth event where our assets almost tripled in size. And so what that meant was that we went from giving away $110 million in 2019, which had been our baseline. And within 3 years, so 2019 was $110 million. And in 2022, we gave away $435 million. And we did that virtually while hiring close to 2/3 of a new staff. And so it was sort of an epic scaling experience under very strange circumstances. And so kind of talking about, you know, Sally, to your earlier point about where things went well and being honest and transparent about where they didn't, I think, you know, what went well is we did it. We were able to have incredible impact with hundreds of more organizations, giving away much larger grants than we had in the past, and to be able to expand the initiatives and the issue areas that we were working in. At the same time, I think we probably violated some of the principles of startups, which is, in this moment of scaling, we also added an incredible amount of process. We did not simplify, we made more complicated. And in reflection and today, where we sit today, it's do we take a step back and streamline? How do we go back to what is fit for purpose and what is extraneous or not serving us, or frankly, making things less efficient? So that's been a primary reflection, just at what cost, how can we scale and also not add things to so many things to our plate when we're already adding the work to our plate. And then I've also reflected quite a bit, and again, in sort of a startup mode, is the importance of bringing people up to speed and how to do that in a virtual environment, but just at all. And what does company culture mean, and how does it get conveyed, shared, transmitted, altered? Our staff is 50% of our staff now has been with the organization for less than 3 years. And so we're in the midst of really a re-engineering or a rethinking of company culture. And that has been another really interesting pause for reflection, and what do we bring with us from the past, and how do we set a new course forward? And I'm not sure we're there yet. I don't know that we have quite ironed that out at this point.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's so healthy as an organization to take that pause. I don't think enough companies or organizations do that, frankly, because I think people are trying to just, survive at a minimum. But I think, to your point, true sustainability, you need those moments to say what is working well, but what isn't. And that's something I wanted to address this evening. I think for folks who work in the social impact and CSR space, we're often sort of forced into this corner where we can only talk about the successes, right? Because there's just a lot on the line. People expect you're hitting all the metrics, everything's done on time, and you're going to do it with very little budget. And so I'm just curious, in this space where we can be more honest and open, like what are some of the challenges, or maybe even as you define it, like failures or just things that you've come up against that you feel like have been formative in just making the right pivot in your personal or professional journey? Just love to hear if there's anything you'd like to share.
Tess, I'll go to you.
Yeah. I think that this is such an important topic to talk about, especially as we're talking about entrepreneurship, right? Because I think of entrepreneurship a little bit like I think of relationships, in that if you do something and you affect certain groups of people or some people, but it doesn't last forever, that's okay. That doesn't mean that it's failure. It means that it was for a period of time. And I'm trying to remind myself of this as Beem comes to a close, or at least this iteration of Beem comes to a close, because I've really poured a lot into it, and it's something that I have believed in the mission of. But that's not to say that it can't have a life form later on, or parts of it are going to be useful for another company. Or the founder and I are going to work together on another project. I think, there are a lot of unintended consequences, but also unintended positive effects of doing something. And many times those positive effects aren't to be known until later down the line. So I would say all opportunity is good opportunity. And if you have an idea, or you're energized by a social impact mission, and you try it, and later it doesn't feel like the right fit for you or for the world at that time, I think that's okay. And there's so much that you've gained, and that the world or the organization has gained through that effort. So I would just say that there's no wrong step.
And I think I would add, I really enjoyed my MSSE experience. So, as JJ said, if you're interested in the program, I can also talk to you about it. And one of the things that I learned about myself was that I felt more impactful within an organization, thus the topic of our conversation tonight in entrepreneurship, that I felt I could make more of an impact within than starting something on my own. But I think it connects exactly to what Tess says as well, because many of the initiatives or changes that we've made within Hilton Foundation operations have been because a person or group of people sat down and sort of just wondered, well, could we be more impactful this way? Or could we be how can we work together to affect a change that we see that we would like to see within the organization? So I think it's also to not feel limited to say that there is only a path to do something new or the next great thing. It's like that could be within your role, within your organization, or within another company.
Well said. And I really appreciate the perspective that both of you have shared. I think sometimes the limitation is that we often see it as such a linear journey, right? It's like point A and Z seems far away, but I think the fact that, right, to your point, Tess and Allison, you just don't know what this iteration or the context you're making in this season, how that might influence the next. And so I think it's important to see sort of these changes and pivots that way. So thank you for that. Before we open it up to questions, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of trends, like what are some issues or challenges you're coming up against now in your work, and what are some trends you anticipate for this year or in the near future?
So I think in the emerging tech space, I'll speak to that. What are some trends where 2 years ago it was very interesting and buzzy to talk about NFTs and the applications of crypto. Now that's not as much the conversation. It's definitely more centered around AI. But I would say also just the idea that let's not talk as much about the actual nuts and bolts of the technology, but rather what is the term is utility, or like what is the function of that technology, or what's the end state goal, and how can exploring the use of new technologies be beneficial, but when are the existing technologies that everyone is comfortable with sufficient? And I think people are getting to a place where there's a lot to learn all the time. So I think it's that my philosophy has started to become, let's give people more of what they're already comfortable with, and then introduce granularly some of the new opportunities that new technologies provide. Of course, there's a lot of buzz and interest around Apple and VR and AR and things of that nature as well. But I think the more we can get past what is the technology and get into what is it doing or delivering for our lives, the better we'll be.
And I guess to that and connecting, certainly within philanthropy, AI is a conversation, but in a positive extent to sort of how can it support learning, how can it support a broader understanding of what interventions are most successful, or sort of what are actors doing in the space and just sort of to help. And then ultimately, I think hopefully efficiencies for nonprofit organizations that are put through so many different processes for funding, and hopefully that they can win back some time. And then we spend quite a bit of time talking about locally led development, which is getting the dollars closer to the individuals and the communities that have the lived experience and expertise about the issues that they are facing. And just as an example, USAID has made a commitment to making 25% of their funding will go to locally led actors, and they cannot seem to get that to be above 10%. And there was a really interesting article actually published by Brookings I think yesterday or the day before on sort of the systemic and structural issues that keep them from being able to meet those milestones. But it continues to be a limitation, or just a conversation about why it remains difficult to move money, particularly when you're talking about work outside of the United States, directly to NGOs in those communities.
That's really interesting. I think we should offline a little bit about that.
Agreed. And I think that's such a strong and powerful takeaway from both of you. I think oftentimes we're spending a lot of time in the what, how do we define it, and not asking the question why, the utility, right? Or why are there limitations? Why can't we get to 25%? So I feel like that resonates for me as a CSR practitioner, right? I spent so much of my time explaining what CSR and social impact was, and we never got to that point of why often enough. So I really appreciate what the two of you are sharing. I know we have about half the session left, and we did receive a lot of questions. So before I get to those, is there anything else, Tess or Allison, that you wanted to share with the group before we get into the questions?
I did see one question that was about, if you don't have much experience, how do you get experience in the field? I feel like that's a really important one to address. And I think that as we become more experienced and later in our career, if we're looking to pivot into a new sector, or you're in school for something but you don't have tangible work experience, I try to remind myself, and I think it's important for everyone to remember, that it's okay to be an apprentice or to have informational conversations with people. As I've been closing out this last chapter of my career and looking for what I'm doing next, I had to remind myself of this and say, hey, I have an amazing network of people, and a lot of them are doing really interesting things. And it's worthwhile to have those conversations as I've started to explore them and see, what am I interested in next? And I think that people are very open to welcoming an apprentice who is passionate and reliable. And I think if you bring those two factors to the table, you're a lot of the way there.
Such a good advice. And I feel like it's applicable at any season of your career. Totally. Allison, you were going to share something.
I think that was also just such great advice. And then sort of like very practically speaking, I think an option a lot of times, or a pathway that I've seen in a lot of instances, and Sally would welcome your impact, both of your input as well, is having some experience, even a year in a nonprofit, and understanding, it is actually the applying the business teaching that I had at USC into how nonprofits function and exist. It was such a useful frame to help me really dive in and have a better understanding they're a marvel. Nonprofit organizations are a marvel that they continue to work and exist every day. But I think, whether it's a cause that you're particularly interested in, or a role within an organization, I do think that some time kind of in that role is a good stepping stone to coming into CSR, coming into philanthropy. Also, in my experience, generally people that work at foundations are pretty open and eager to talking to people who are interested in working in foundations. So LinkedIn is can really work. And I saw somebody had wanted contact information of the panelists. I'm happy to provide that at the end. But just being willing to engage and have those conversations, because as Tess said, you don't know where that next role may come from, or you don't know who might be looking for somebody within their own organization.
Yeah, and I think, Allison, to your point, there are ways to get that kind of experience, even leadership experience, without making it your full-time thing. So if you're in school, you want to join a board or a volunteer group for a nonprofit, I think that's a great way to start getting that experience. And obviously it would be something that you're passionate about and fulfilling that could lead you then down further that path.
Ditto. I wholeheartedly agree. And it's something I share often is, right, Tess, you said you're looking for somebody who demonstrates passion, reliability. And I think serving on a board, volunteering, working at a nonprofit, getting really familiar with the language, right, it demonstrates both of those things. So I think that's definitely a really good start. And who knows where it will lead, to your point. So thank you for that.
Just to underscore it, serving on boards has been one of the most rewarding parts of my career, and it is a crash course in just learning about organizational operations and structure and leadership and governance.
I agree. All right, well, I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions, so feel free to type in your questions. I hope I'm able to see them. If I'm missing it, please somebody keep me honest. But I did want to start with a few questions that we received through Eventbrite. Allison, I'm gonna turn to you here. What's the best way for nonprofits to engage with companies about social impact alignment?
Yeah, the proverbial and like literal $1 million question in many cases. This is so, I almost feel sort of not well positioned to answer this question, but I will do my best to provide a perspective, which is, speaking as Allison, just as an individual, I think that foundations and corporate foundation, private foundations, corporate foundations, they get sort of hard and opaque to do this work effectively for nonprofits. I think sometimes we put up barriers intentionally and unintentionally on how to do the engagement. All of that being said, I think that there's, first and foremost, it's ensuring that there is alignment between what the nonprofit is doing and what the funder is saying that they support. And I think that the hard part is the paradigm sort of sometimes positions a nonprofit to have to say that they're doing something that is aligned when but staying true to your own mission while doing that. So I think a lot of times if there are opportunities, in LA, I know a lot of the foundations will do a meet the grant maker or sort of host info sessions. And I think attending those is where they're offered or available is incredibly important. I also know that if you are able to connect with a program officer, having an open, a conversation where you may hear that the answer is there isn't a fit, but that still is worth, ultimately, it saves time in the end. And it is sort of a path to be able to spend time with the foundations or the potential funders that really will support your mission and really will understand it and champion it. So I think it's trying to reflect on kind of what is the funding that you're seeking, and then really seeing if those funders are aligned is kind of the first step. And then the sometimes harder part is making the connection and getting in there. But Sally would love to hear what you would say from that perspective as well. But I do think it's entering into the conversation with sort of a clear statement from the clear feeling from the nonprofit about what is your North Star, what is your value add, and what do you want that funder to champion for you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think just over the years, getting a lot of inquiries from nonprofits, it's strange when you have a dialogue. The nonprofit rarely comes to the table saying, this is what we can deliver, this is what we're about, this is why we do what we do. Because I feel for nonprofits, you're sort of at the mercy of whatever funding is available, and you feel like you can't lead with that. But I agree, I think you have to. And if there isn't a fit, this might not be the right organization that you want to partner with anyway. But I think putting that up front is wise. So I think it's more efficient, it's more authentic, and I think you'll know if someone's going to be intentional and delivering those results with you. So great answer, and I totally agree. I'm going to ask this question. Hopefully it answers, it covers one or two questions that were asked, and some that we're getting here is, how can young startups or any business strike a balance between profit-driven strategies and sustainable practices to ensure long-term success? And I think there was another question, sort of like, how do you insulate the social impact piece of the business when there is market volatility or there's a weaker economy? Like, do you have any thoughts or perspectives on how to sort of insulate and also strike a right balance between the profit side and the impact side of doing your work? That's a big question, so give you a moment.
It's a big question, but it's a good question. I think that when developing a social impact strategy for a startup, it's important to know what that startup's goals are. So what are the always North Stars of that, to use Allison's North Star language? What are the always North Stars of that company, and what's its function? So for example, if we're looking at Paramount, the function is always going to be about entertainment, but it's also going to be about community. And so thinking about what is the core function of the business and how can social impact be within that and actually feed that business growth. So I think that to insulate I think when it gets more challenging to have production is when it's a completely separate part of the business. And that's not to say, for example, let's take the Academy of, or it's called the Recording Academy. I just watched the Grammys, and I know that they have their separate nonprofit arm called Music Cares. So Music Cares has one function and the Recording Academy has another function, but they both support each other. And I think having alignment from the get-go about what your core function of your business is and the social impact strategy is what will make it more sustainable. Of course, I'm not going to deny, I think the other element is having close relationships between the leaders of those entities, whether it's a department within a corporate structure or a startup, and the CEO or the leadership of the primary company. I think having those conversations where there's mutual respect and making sure that it is reminded that this social impact priority is also a priority of the company and encapsulates, maybe why people are more productive at work, maybe why customers value your brand. I think using those leverage points to just back up the work that you're doing on the social impact front or the CSR front is important.
That's a great answer. I agree. I think it's, even if they are separate, right, the impact roles and the other functional expertise, there's clarity and separation of roles, but the integration, to your point, is critical, right? Just making sure, ensuring sort of long-term success. And I like what you said about the importance of the relationships between those leaders. And especially in entertainment, they're like, it's so relationship driven, and people are like, oh, it feels kind of gross. But I think at the heart of it, it's because that's how you engender trust, right? Like, I have to trust you as a partner to know when you're giving me advice or, giving us thoughts and recommendations on how to run the business, that is coming from a place where you respect my business and the challenges that I'm up against. And I think that's why that sort of relationship side of it is so important. So thank you for just a reminder of both.
Yeah, and I'll add in, just because this got re-emphasized to me recently, that people love data.
Yeah.
If people are looking to cut your department or the data is ambiguous, gather as much as you can, or continue gathering throughout your work, but present that data in a way that's compelling, perhaps, and tell the story of why this is going to be a part of the growth trajectory, not just the past.
Yeah, agreed. I feel like we could rename this session the story of why, right? It's switching gears a little bit. It looks like we've received quite a few questions about AI and really how it's impacting your field. Whether, Allison, you see AI sort of being involved in the review and scoring of grants. Did either of you want to sort of address how that's been impacting your work?
Yeah, I can do that quickly. And hi, Cynthia, you or have you here? Just answering, like we at the Hilton Foundation, we are not currently using AI for that function. And in terms of reviewing or scoring grant applications, we are not using it for that purpose. Some of the use cases, generally speaking, all of the use cases that I have seen in philanthropy, it is additive to a human. So it may support, it may facilitate research, it may do some aggregation work, but it does not preclude or eliminate human inner work, additional human work. So, we've talked about use cases to sort of summarize. We have a large, a lot of work in ending chronic homelessness in Los Angeles County. So a use case that we're not currently using, but could be, is summarize all of the LA Times coverage on chronic homelessness over the last 5 years and give me the salient themes. And that would be a starting point for us to perhaps go probe our own portfolio about where where did we have alignment with the news articles, where did we not? But ultimately, it is not intent. I have not seen use cases where humans are then no longer involved.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I love that it's the additive, it's not replacing. So I think that's an important sort of underlying factor, or something we need to talk about when it comes to AI. I want to go to a lighter question. I like this. I think Paris asked this question: what social media accounts do any of our panelists use, whether it's day to day or just to rely on for information?
Yeah, I use Instagram, LinkedIn, and I'm starting to dabble in TikTok a little bit more, mostly for recipes though. But I would say, I spend most of my time, also Twitter, X. I wasn't a big Twitter user until this job at Beem, but the community that was very involved in Web3 and crypto at the time was mostly concentrated on Twitter. So I got much more use of Twitter and really got the bug, I think, in the last few years, using Twitter Spaces as well as Clubhouse when it came out. We used quite a bit. So I think that's still very relevant.
I use for work generally LinkedIn, and I'm on Instagram, but it's like a private account and I barely ever post. So I'm sort of a Luddite in that respect. But I'll take a good cat video on Instagram.
I love it. All right. This is one of the questions we received through Eventbrite, and hopefully it's answered, or we're asking a question that a lot of folks are curious about. But how do you discern whether to stay within an organization that seems to treat CSR and ESG as a number 2 priority? I like that question. Maybe that's why I was like, we gotta.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's about whether you think you can have a continued impact at that organization. I don't think that there's a right answer or a wrong answer. It's a question of, do you personally feel like you can continue to make the impact you want to see in the world while being at that organization? If it is a number 2 priority, great, like continue to make it number 2. And I would say, if it's an organization that has the ability to make a big influence with that number 2 position, don't discard that. Understand that that can be really meaningful still. And perhaps there are opportunities where you can continue to grow within that slot, knowing that they're always going to care more about, let's say, producing a Hollywood film with a rom-com with 2 known actors who are white.
I think I would add to that, because I agree with that. You know, it's sort of another way to think about it is, will it be enough for you, you know, with your role, whatever your role is within the organization, whether it's specifically CSR related or perhaps support or align, you know, can you feel sufficiently fulfilled within your role, knowing that it's contributing to a portion of the CSR? Or, you know, and another way I think about this as well is do you feel, you know, do you feel aligned to what the CSR is supporting? That's another, you know, that's another avenue of it. So even if it's maybe not as much as you would like, but it's a cause that you're deeply invested in, you know, it's educational programs, and that is what you want to be supporting, then I think that helps kind of, does it feel aligned enough, to Tess's point, you know, is number 2 okay? And then ultimately, I guess, to reflect on an earlier conversation, if it's not enough, but it's not really an option to go elsewhere, then how is there a different opportunity for you to channel that effort, that desire to have impact in personally, and in, you know, as a board member, as a volunteer, or, you know, a direct service volunteer? I think that that's another way to bring that into your kind of work experience and life, even if the company isn't quite doing enough or as much as you would want.
Yeah. To Allison's point, she has me thinking about, you know, I've been thinking about the word impact and what I want in the next phase of my career. And I think that we get sometimes really hung up on one form of impact. And I've been trying to challenge myself to think about, you know, what are some other ways that are really impactful? What are some other careers that are really impactful? You know, thinking about people-oriented jobs, or jobs that are working with the employee community. You know, I think that there are many ways to create an impact. So to Allison's point, if you're in an organization, you're frustrated with their lack of investment in a specific type of impact, maybe there's a way that you can channel that desire to see the impact that you're making in a way that's a little closer to home.
And sorry, Sally, can I add one more thing that to what Tess is saying? You know, I'll say, for me, not every program area that the Hilton Foundation invests in resonates with me. I'll just say it's not all of them are resonant for me. But what is the fact that all of the organizations that we're supporting are trying to fulfill their mission as effectively as they can. And if I can make that process better for them, if I can have an impact on how they feel about their experience with the Hilton Foundation, then that's, for me, that is the enough. And it's okay that it's maybe not the program area that I'm most passionate about. It's that my ability to make them have a positive experience is my enough.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's strong, just this idea of diversifying where you're having impact, right? If it's not, you're not getting it all in sort of the 9-to-5 job, there are so many sort of different avenues you can explore personally, just to make sure those needs are met, or really to drill down into sort of the why for you, right? And is that why being met, and is it enough? So just great points on both of your parts. We have a question that sort of piggybacks on this idea of board service. So do you see corporate board members as also being intrapreneurs or agents of change? And can one person really make a difference in the boardroom?
I guess I'll go for, I say I'm an eternal optimist. I answer yes to both questions. So I do think that corporate board membership is a source of entrepreneurship, because of course you're there for the expertise that you have in, in leadership in some capacity. And I think that boards do great service in providing strategic thought partnership about how the business or whatever the business is can be improved. In terms of, can one person make an impact? I mean, I can see it. As a person who navigates with a board, I can see like one person can have a lot of impact within a board dynamic. But, and joking aside, I think, yes, it can be lonely, I imagine, sometimes, to be new to a board or to be bringing more of an entrepreneurship or an impact mindset. But I do think that ultimately there's learning for other board members can be involved in, it can be a learning journey for them. But I guess ultimately I feel like it's worth it to be potentially lonely for a little while in that role.
I echo a lot of what Allison said. This question actually makes me think about my mother, who spent a lot of her career on boards. And I got to kind of be her wing woman when she would feel lonely and feel like, hey, I wasn't able to sway the board to come behind my suggestion this time, but I'm going to keep that point alive, and I'm going to keep bringing it to the table and speaking my mind, because that's the reason I'm on this board. And I think remembering that you were appointed to a board for your unique views and your unique skill set is really important in remembering to be vocal and bring your biggest dreams and thoughts for the organization to the table, right? Because you don't really have that much to lose as a board member, I feel like, in terms of, I mean, obviously you can lose your board seat, but on a positive note, you can gain respect and you can gain experience, and you're there to be an outlet for the things that the primary drivers of that organization can't see. So I think don't be afraid to bring that perspective.
That's so good. And I really appreciate both of you addressing sort of the loneliness aspect. I serve on a very prominent veteran service organization. I remember when I got there, everybody was like a West Point grad, a general, an admiral. We took down Osama bin Laden. And I was like, what am I doing here? Right? It was this feeling of like, and I usually don't get imposter syndrome, but I was just like, ooh, who does not belong? Once we started getting into conversations about social impact, volunteerism, and fundraising, I was like, wait a second, I know the answer, right? I might not be able to take down enemy or handle deployment, but I can have, answer this question. So I think, yeah, that one person does play a role because they have such a different perspective and have encountered issues from different facets. So I appreciate you both sort of addressing the loneliness aspect, but that worth it piece of it, right? Yeah.
This is Veterans in Media and Entertainment, Sally?
Not that one, but the mission continues. Yes. I was like,
Oh,
I
the
joined
mission
Admiral
continues.
McCraven and I was like, oh my goodness, I should not be in the same sort of press release. But then it was like, oh, that's why they brought me on board, right? It was a nice, good moment.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I know we have another question that I'd want, Ian, I'm not ignoring your question. I just want to make sure I do it justice here. Just sort of to paraphrase here, it sounds like Ian's asking, there's been an increased attention, whether through regulatory pressures or really just more of a heightened focus on social impact and CSR and really making it more mainstream, right? Than sort of a side dish. And so I'm just curious, how has that either hurt or helped your work?
I guess Tess, I can start on the philanthropy side. I think I think it's a few years ago now that the nonprofits and philanthropy have such an ongoing communication and dialogue around general operating support versus project restricted grants and sort of what can be measured and what can't be measured. And I think that we the we being the philanthropic sector, need to remain mindful of sort of the tyranny of outcomes, and that not everything, maybe everything can be measured, but perhaps it doesn't need to be measured in order to determine whether there has been impact. So I think that there's been a balance, or a careful balance, between what do we need to demonstrate that the work is, I guess, even just charitable in a and then social change takes a long time, and it's not always easy to count. It's not effective to count beans at the end of 24 months and say XYZ impact has occurred. So I think that the pressure to do so is one that we continue to navigate in philanthropy.
That was really well put. I think going back to the question, which was about, if we can kind of restate it. It was about the change.
The increased focus on it. How does that either help or hurt, how you approach business?
Increased focus on CSR and impact. How does it help or hurt?
Yeah.
I think that Allison's point about measuring is so true, even in business development efforts. What can you measure right away, and what's a longer term tail, right? And I think that the focus on CSR, I mean, I would like to think that it's a very good thing, in that at least people are starting to be familiar with language, and people are starting to be familiar with ideas, and the idea that a company can have this as a priority and still have profit as a priority, I think is a win holistically for the industry and for people who are passionate like us about these topics. But I think Allison's watch out is very astute, in that there are some things that are better left unmeasured. So not to forget that.
And I love that. And I think we're just out of time here. So want to turn it over to Dr. Kickle to close us out. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you to all our panelists. Oh, it's so good to, Sally, thank you for your wonderful moderation here. I really want to also thank, Allison, of course, and coming back from the MSSC program, cohort 3. Tess, it's always great to see you as well. And really a shout out to the Jacobson family, who, Libby and Arthur, who made this possible. And be on the lookout. We're going to have, a couple more lecture series coming up too as well. But really some great insights, whether we're learning in the classroom, whether we're learning from experience. But entrepreneurship is so valuable in the terms of bringing innovation, to society. And it's not always about starting ventures, because there's so much potential about what we can do to bring social impact and innovation to existing organizations who, really need it in these times. So thank you so much again to everyone. Really fantastic. Be on the lookout if you're not on our list and you're not following us on Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook. Be sure, of course, to do so. We'd love to hear from you. And it was just really wonderful. Again, thank you. Thank you all our panelists, and thank you, Sally. Always good to see you and see you all. So take care, stay warm and dry, and we'll see you at our next lecture series here very soon.